Hi, I'm Stephanie. And I'm Katie, and this is the Reading Nook Magic podcast. And today we have the amazing Ava Morgyn, and we're going to be talking about, her life as an author and her awesome book, The Bane Witch, which we just finished. And we're so excited to chat with you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. So first things first, how long have you been an author, and how much do you love it?
I love it in a way that's probably not healthy. I make jokes about being an author being sort of like more of an issue than a good thing. Like you kind of have to be a little bit obsessive, I think, to pursue this. I have been pursuing this in some form for probably 20 years now. And I have had little successes along the way, some little indie deals and things that would like happen and then collapse, and kind of the back and forth of it all, and started writing adult and publishing with St. Martin's Griffin. Just honestly, I should know what year that was, but I really don't off the top of my head. I'm terrible with time, but it's been a few years now.
Same way. So did you always know that you wanted to be an author, or is this something that you came into as an adult?
It's definitely something I always knew. I was pretty young when I fell in love with books and fell in love with reading, and very quickly became enthralled with the idea of being an author, and kind of started going around and saying, well, I'm going to be an author. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an author when I grow up. And that really never left me. There was, I did go to college for English writing and rhetoric, but I didn't finish. We ended up having a family really early and unexpectedly, and I kind of found my way back to writing and fiction while I was raising my kids. So I think, it's always been there for me. It's always been something I've wanted, but there were a lot of years of just not knowing exactly how to get there. It's not like a really straight, obvious path, and you have to kind of jump through some hoops, and there's some sort of different things in place. And also the industry is always changing. So we have like self-publishing has really become big over the course of the last 20 years that I've been doing this and pursuing it and stuff like that. So, some of those things have also.
So you mentioned that you moved into young adult. So you obviously didn't start out writing young adult. So what were you doing before, and how did you kind of make that transition?
Well, I actually did. I started out writing young adult. Actually, I moved into adult later. And adult is what I write right now. But I pursued young adult for a really long time. And that's what I was writing for a really long time. It's just a genre that I fell in love with because that's what my kids were reading. And my girls would bring these books home, and we would read the same books, and we would talk about what we were reading. And we didn't really, when I was growing up, we didn't really have young adult. Like, it wasn't its own genre yet. You could sort of find these coming of age stories, but nobody was really calling anything young adult. You couldn't go straight to a shelf for that at the bookstore or anything.
Right.
So I wasn't
its own entity yet.
Huh?
I said it wasn't its own entity yet.
No, it wasn't. So I really loved when it really kind of came into its own, and my daughters were really discovering it, and then I was getting to read it. And so I started out writing for young adult, and did that for a long time, and eventually started writing adult when my agent approached me about a particular project, if I would be interested in writing, in particular, a witchy adult novel.
So the publisher, was it because, were your young adult novels in the same sort of witchy vibe, or they just happened to pick that for you?
They were always, all of my novels I always lean dark, and I always lean magical. There's always going to be fantastical elements, and there are always going to be dark themes. I kind of can't get away from that, even if I try. So my young adult work was still like that. It wasn't really as specifically witch coded. I have 2 young adult novels that are out, Resurrection Girls and The Salt in Our Blood currently. And, one of those involves tarot and a lot of fantastical elements like that. And the other one involves sort of a underlying kind of Greek mythology underpinnings. And they're very sort of witch coded without being in your face, or, witch isn't in the title. Nobody's explicitly being called a witch, but I always have these kind of fantastical elements. And I also tend to lean very feminine and feminist. Like I write for women, my characters are women. There's a lot of women coming into their power as a theme in my story. Female relationships are really big for my story. So, friends, sisters, mother, daughter, those kind of relationships and kind of how things are passed down through generations comes into my stories a lot. So I've kind of always swam in these waters, but it wasn't until I started writing adult that I really explicitly stepped into these characters are witches. This is how their magic works. I think I got a little more straightforward with it.
Right. Yeah, because I was thinking kind of jumping ahead to where I wanted to. I was wondering, it's very intense subject matter in the Bane Witch, right?
Yes.
And what their allures bring in and the evil of the men in it. And I was like, obviously curious as to how you came up with that concept. I personally love it. I loved it for a lot of reasons, but just like who I am as a person, it tends to be a soft spot for me too. Every woman does, but in particular, abused women and children is just something that is like my, in the arms of an angel, Sarah McLachlan like commercial. It's just what like pulls at my strings. So I was just curious, like how you landed on that specifically. Is that like a common theme through all your books, or is this just something that was specific to this one?
I don't know if it's a common theme through all of my books. Certainly not like it is in the Bane Witch. I was much more explicit with it in this novel. And I think for me, it really grew out of several things. Just one, kind of an overarching sort of justice sensitivity that is, it's so pervasive. Violence against women, abuse of women. It just sort of, as an adult, I kind of came to this realization that I don't know. I could probably count on one hand, if that many, hardly any women that don't have some kind of story like this in their background, some kind of domestic violence story, abusive partner, essay, just all these kind of experiences. And I think as women, we come together, we form friendships, we build community, and we share these stories with one another. But it's this thing where it's like it kind of gets whispered. You know what I mean? It's so hard for us to speak out about our experiences in any kind of loud or public way. There's so much shame that gets pushed at women whenever they admit to having gone through some of these things, but it's so pervasive and it's so ubiquitous. And when I really kind of woke up to that, it was so upsetting for me. And then you can't really turn on TV. Like a lot of people, I love documentaries and I watch true crime stuff. And I enjoy a lot of the same kind of things that other people are binging on Netflix. And how much of that is specifically crimes against women or some kind of violence or abuse against women. And so it's one of those things that eats at me. And I think women are so resilient. We have this wonderful capacity to kind of put things aside and carry on because that's just what we have to do. We have people we love, people we're taking care of, children we're raising, families, spouses, parents. It's just what we do. We put it aside and we just carry on with our lives. And we have this incredible strength. But it's also such a travesty that so many of us are still dealing with it. And it's not really better in the ways we probably all thought it was going to be better by now.
No.
And for me, this was a very cathartic book to write. It was like, I got to put just the worst of the worst in there. I thought if I'm going to write this character who's essentially an anti-hero, and she's killing people, they've got to be really bad people for sure. They really have, in order for readers to really go on board with her and sympathize. And so I really got to put the worst of the worst in there and then, do horrible things to them that made me feel a lot better. It was a cathartic thing to write. And I think it's been a cathartic thing for a lot of women to read. And it was just my own little personal way of feeling like I could do something about it. And it's been interesting because I think it's sparked a lot of dialogue. I mean, even just within my own family, with my husband and my children and stuff, just talking about things as a result of this book. And I hope that's something that continues for other people, for readers, and just kind of continues to bring attention to it. But it is just really, really so pervasive.
Yeah.
Have you found that like women have reached out to you like after reading it, like about the story, about how it made them feel? Like what does that look like after?
Yeah, I have had that experience. I've had quite a few readers reach out and tell me how much it meant to them, how much they related to here's a story or somebody else's story in the book. And none of the things I wrote about, as terrible as they are completely imagined. These are things that somewhere in the world happened to somebody, every single one of them. None of them are things I completely made up. And so it meant a lot to me. The first couple of times that happened where somebody reached out and let me know that they really felt like this book kind of represented their story and made them feel seen and heard, that meant the world to me, for sure. As an author, you're writing fiction to a certain degree. Everything's a little bit of a plot device. Like I'm trying to do justice to a real situation and a real issue that's happening in the world, but I also am trying to write a compelling story that readers want to follow. And that's kind of always my concern with heavier subject matter, is if people who've really experienced this will feel well represented by what I've written or not. And I never want people to feel like I just used an experience they had or used their trauma in some way. But I've gotten really wonderful feedback on it. So that's really meant a lot to me.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. That's something I would be afraid of as well, because I do have an idea. We just talked about with someone else, like an idea of a story I want to write, but there's a lot of heavy stuff in it, and like drawing. But like you want to be cognizant of the fact that it's not. You didn't do this,
right.
But I can imagine being careful to not exploit it for the sake of the drama of it, right? And I think that's a really fine line, and you definitely managed to do that with grace.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it made sense. It was like, of course. Yes. Their power comes from these little fuckers existing.
Yeah. I mean, women need a place to put their anger, right? Like we deserve a platform for our anger as well. There needs to be a place where we just get to say, this is 100,000% not okay. And this is what it would look like if I didn't have to censor myself to be safe in this world. This is what it would look like if I really reacted in the ways that I feel like are truly fair and just to the situation. So, it's I think a book where we all get to have some of that experience, kind of like, the vigilante justice thing. It's like a justice most of us aren't going to see in the world, as women. Most, of the stories that I know and of my own personal experiences, most of these people were never even confronted about what they have done, right? Like most of those men have just gone about freely in the world and they will zero consequences whatsoever. So, the vast majority of us are seeing no justice at all around our experiences. And this is a place where we get to have that.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Thank you.
It really is. I like that you added a good man in it though, too. I think that was important that, because when you are focused on the evil of the world and you can easily be hyper focused on that, right? It's like, okay, everyone's evil and there's so many bad people and there's so many bad men and women, but particular men, because that's what we're talking about right now. And especially for women that have been through it once, twice, it's a nice reminder that you can sense the safety and there is safe men.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really important part of the well-roundedness of the story.
Yeah.
To me.
It felt important to me. I mean, I have a husband, I have a son, and they're nothing like the men in this book. And I wanted readers to have that experience of this is what it looks like when it's done poorly, when it's wrong, when it's bad, when it's evil, but this is what it looks like. There are just good people, good men. This isn't a book that's, I had somebody ask me about it, about if I thought about how uncomfortable it might make men to read this book. And obviously not. I don't really write for people's comfort.
No, definitely no.
If you've read anything of mine, that's not what I'm writing for. But Um,
Are we making them all on?
Oh, no.
Oh no! So
Can't have that.
that was kind of a shocking thing to be asked, but I wanted to be very clear that this book is not villainizing men; it's villainizing predators. And it is
Yes.
a sad statistical fact that a lot of predatory behavior comes from men, or a lot of predators are men, and a lot of people committing violence and abuse against women that are men. But that doesn't mean that that's happening just because they're men. And so I really wanted to draw that line and also give my main character and my readers a little bit of a safe place to go. Like, what is safe, healthy masculinity, partnering look like,
Yeah, because it's not just, you're right. It's not just villainizing. You didn't villainize men. You villainized predators, and they should be villainized. So
Absolutely.
That's why the whole internet went crazy with, I'm sure you saw it. Would you rather your daughter be in the woods with a bear or a man?
Right.
And everyone said a bear.
Right.
I mean, there you go.
Right.
That's horrendous.
Right. It's a really, and it's funny because I that was a big discussion for us around here, and trying to talk with some of the men in our family about it, and just, they were just really like so head scratchy about it. Like, what? And again, this is where, kind of like one of the conversations I've had with my husband around all of this is, again, and I think in some ways we do a little bit of a disservice. Not that it's our fault, because we're really coping with and reacting to the world that we live in. But, we keep these stories to ourselves. We tell them to our other close female relationships, but we're not always sharing them with the men in our lives. Like, my son didn't know a lot of things about my past or some of the things that I had experienced, right? Like, and so, one of the conversations we've had is how hard it is for them to sometimes process and absorb that all men aren't like you, right? Like, there are a lot of men out there that they aren't like you. They don't have that empathy. They don't have that right there. And so,
Yeah. The thing I wanted to know about the story, so I was curious that whether you were always into like the witchy, magical stuff, and you answered that. So did you, now I'm not a witch fiction expert, so I don't know, but like, I thought that your concept of the witch was was different, right? It was more believable, if you will, to a non-believer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you don't believe in fantastical things,
right.
It seemed pretty practical way to explain a witch.
Yeah.
Like, you ingest these poisonous things, you have the ability to do that, and then you have an insane intuition to know who is evil, and then you can pass the poison. Like, I mean, whether you believe in witchcraft or not, that was a super a way in which most mainstream people could relate to a witch. And I was wondering if you came up with that yourself,
or the inspiration.
Yeah, how were you inspired by that?
When I first started kind of telling people about this book, I kept saying it's a whole new breed of witch, and that's really kind of how I saw it. And so one of the things for me with my books is I really think the archetype of the witch can be used in a lot more ways than we've seen up to this point. We have sort of the very historical, Wizard of Oz, green skin, evil, bad witch, kind of the whole demonized, whatever, patriarchal thing. And then we kind of have, our newer, more contemporary versions of witchcraft, the Sisters in Practical Magic, and a lot of the witchlit that's going around online. And a lot of those tend a little cozy, and they're lovely and they're wonderful. So I'm not in any way criticizing any of that. But for me, I really, like I said, I tend to lean dark almost all the time. And I also just really feel like there's so many different ways to explore that archetype that might be a little different than the way we've seen it before. Because again, the archetype of the witch, we're really just talking about an empowered woman who's either being idealized or demonized, one or the other. But that's really what we're talking about. And so I really wanted to explore some just wildly different kind of scenarios, types of magic. In The Witches of Bone Hill, which is the book that came out before the Bane Witch, I got into Scandinavian witchcraft based on like some very old historical information and real practices, and sort of brought that into a contemporary setting. And then in this book, I just sort of created, like I said, a whole new breed of witch, my own version. And a lot of it was kind of born out of necessity. So the idea that they're essentially excreting the toxins through their bodily fluids really just creates a scenario in which they can be very stealthy, right? And get up close and have an opportunity to actually take out some of these men without just being discovered over and over again. And eating the poisonous plants, I'm fascinated by plants. And so honestly, I was just like, can I just do a lot of botany research? Like, how much fun to just research all these plants. And I'm always so fascinated by how plants are healing or they're toxic. And a lot of times it's depending on how much of a certain thing you have. And so to me, that just seems very practical. The whole concept of them kind of having a cycle and needing to feed and going through a bloom and having this allure, all of those were like really practical things that needed to be put into place for this to make sense. Because if you didn't have to do it, if it wasn't driven in you in a instinctual way, then why would they do it? Why would they put themselves through that? That would be a pretty hard life to live. Even if you were taking out the worst of the worst, if you aren't a sociopath, killing people isn't going to be fun over and over again necessarily. So,
right. And that they have to they had to give up men too. And like that, you know, even their sons.
Right.
I mean, that was a big price. I have a son too. And
yeah,
at the moment I feel like I could give up, but I don't know about my son, you know?
Yeah. There have to be consequences. I think in any magical setting, fantastical setting, magical world building, there has to be consequences for the magic. What are the consequences? I mean, just practically, that's a thing in real life that we deal with all the time. Everything kind of costs something else. So, you know, what are the consequences of that?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, just the ending to what you were saying is like, I feel like every time we talk about a book, we talk about how either witches or vampires, they all have the same framework. Like, so it feels like they all essentially come from the same place and it's just expanding on it. Really did an amazing job with no like holes or gaps or things that didn't make sense with this completely new concept. It was just such a fun, new way to experience witches. It was like crazy. It was awesome. And that was even cooler knowing, I was wondering if you were pulling from something else. Now that I know you really came up with it in your own, like, amazing. Yeah, it was refreshing.
Thank you.
You know, I mean, not that I don't love my like stereotypical stuff, but like I said, it's more believable. It's more in line with, like, I could see that happening here. Yeah, like, why wouldn't that be happening?
Right. It sort of felt like it could be a real thing. And we do have historical accounts. I didn't develop the idea from this, but I've always been somewhat fascinated by, I think we all find it a little fascinating when we hear a story about a female killer, right? Especially like a female serial killer. That's a pretty rare, unusual thing. And so we have some pretty interesting historical accounts of female poisoners. I think it's Tofana, is it Juliana or something, Tofana, who was like, had developed her own poison and they were selling it in cosmetics for women who had abusive spouses and needed to get out of their situation way back when. And there was a famous French poisoner, Lavoisin. And, you know, we'll never know for sure all the facts around those stories. It's kind of like, you know, when they say that history is written by the victor. So there's kind of a double thing happening there where in one way they're kind of set up as like, oh, they were terrible, but they're somebody else's like saving grace. And it's really interesting, some of those stories. So I did have some inspiration in that regard, just of wanting to pursue the poison application, essentially.
Yeah. It's fitting for women. I mean, because we can't overpower them physically. Right. I would love to. Try. I would love to. But you can't. Right. So, you know. It's a very feminine way to go about murdering people. With the alert. I do love though that you talk about the relationships between women in it, and it's sad that she has a shitty relationship with her mom, but a lot of us do, so it's relatable. Yeah. But the way she felt at home with her aunt right from the beginning, like I actually, well, we're gonna do an episode on it, like a review episode where we'll talk about the quotes that we liked, but I did highlight that, like that she felt like home when she got there, and she felt taken care of, and just that's that mothering sense of femininity. I don't know. I just appreciated it. It was nice. It was like a good, like really, really heavy, dark stuff, and then it still felt good.
Yeah.
So like I feel like that's what to do. Yeah, but then to play devil's advocate to that is, you know, what women experience too when there's other women who like we're supposed to be on the same team, right? And oh, that's interesting. The Venery, is that how you say it? Mm-hmm. Okay. How like difficult they made it on her, and she potentially showed a little too much power, so it worried them. Right. Like it was such a real perspective on even like sometimes we're our own worst enemies.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Well, I felt like, again, I really tried to explore what it might really feel like to be able to do something like this, to really have an ability like this. And so on the one hand, while it seems like it might be quite stealthy and easy, on the other hand, women have been killed for far less, right? And so the idea that they would have a lot of fear about being discovered or being held accountable or responsible for any of these murders made a lot of sense to me. Even if they have this ability to be stealthy, they would still be very protective, I think, and secretive about what they could do and how they were doing it. And so I thought there was something very plausible about having some reservation and pushback about this newcomer who's very inexperienced and really didn't get the education that she was supposed to get. And also I thought there was something very plausible in her mother's story about what would it look like if you just really didn't want it, if you were just you just wanted to have a normal life and have a partner and have a relationship, and you were willing to kind of fight that at all costs, you know, and how might that go and strain their relationship. And I think there's something very real about her mother's story and relationship, the marriage that she was in, to me, the way so many women, especially I think in previous generations, sort of settled or stayed in relationships that were pretty unfulfilling. Like maybe they weren't as bad as what Piers was dealing with, but they were still definitely no real emotional intimacy or anything there for whatever benefit they could get out of it, and for the sake of just trying to keep them get through another day and take care of their children and things like that. And so yeah, I sort of really enjoyed exploring all of those things.
Yeah, so it's like those are well-rounded. Yeah, like so I wrote that somewhere, and I don't know where I put it or what I said exactly, but there's so much more going on and so much more thought behind this book than you even realize.
Yeah.
Right. Like everything's so interwoven. There's a reason. It's like, it is very complex.
Thank you. Yeah. Some of that is intentional and some of that is subconscious. I think every author could probably say that there are things we know we're doing and we're trying to do, and then there are things that surprise even us after the fact. Like, where did that come from? You know? So, yeah.
Right. Nice. Yeah, that worked out. Yeah. So overall, loved it. Again, we're gonna do like a review, but while we're interviewing you, you can watch our review. But anyway, so yeah, so I'd love to learn a little bit about what your process looks like at any point that you want to share, whether it's the start of the storyline, like what do you do with the concept, or what does your writing process look like what can you tell us just about your process when it's whatever you want to share about that.
Well, I'll kind of start off by saying that I'm a little bit of a hybrid between a plotter and a pantser, which is kind of how they like to subdivide authors a lot of times. Plotters, the ones who plot everything out in advance before they start writing, and then pantsers, the ones who don't plot anything in advance and just jump in with both feet and see where it goes. And I've really kind of developed into a hybrid, somewhere in the middle. I need some structure from the beginning. I need an idea of where I'm headed and sort of some scaffolding to hang everything on. But then I also need to be able to hold some of that loosely. And there are always things that come up in the course of writing that I didn't expect and didn't know would happen and didn't know would be part of the story that kind of can change the direction or fill in gaps or, alter things along the way. So I kind of work back and forth. And I usually start with a concept or a premise. Sometimes it's a very loose idea, or in the beginning, it may start as a very, very loose idea. And I usually have a lot of things like that brewing in the back of my mind all the time. And then a lot of times what will happen is I'll start to pull some of those, what I thought were separate ideas together. So when I was first thinking about, I want to write something about like poisonous female assassins, they weren't witches originally in my mind. I was thinking some kind of YA thing and, just sneaky, stealthy poisoners. I don't know, but I started pulling other things together that had kind of been in my mind. And so I'll usually kind of start pulling that together and forming a real premise. And usually what I do at this point is I'll sit down and kind of map out a bit of structure for myself, what it's going to look like. I'll write a full synopsis for my publisher based off of that and some sample chapters. The beginning of any novel is always my strongest time. I love writing beginnings. If I could start and not finish 1 million novels and make money off of that, that's what I would do forever. I love it so much.
When I write my novel, you can start it for me. That could be a new side gig.
Yeah, for real. It's my favorite part. It's where I always feel the strongest. I'm just starting to hear the character's voice. I'm really building the world, the setting, all of the things that I love. What is the atmosphere, the mood, the vibe? I'm finding whatever my voice is going to be for that story. And so that's kind of always my favorite part. And then somewhere in the middle, things tend to veer off course and I get worried and very doubtful. And it just starts to feel like book scoop for a while. Like, where's this going? And I don't know if any of this makes any sense. And that's kind of the worst part. My kids tell me, they remind me every time because there's always a period where they will call to check in or something. And how is it going? And I'm like, well, it's shit is what it is. It's just garbage. Like, it's the worst thing I've written. And, it started out great and I had this great idea and now I've ruined it. And I don't know if I can fix it, but I'm going to do the best I can. And they're always like, okay, but remember you do this every time. And I'll say, I don't think I did this the last time. And they're like, you absolutely did it the last time. You do it every time. So there's a whole middle period that just feels really uncomfortable. And that's always the point at which I'm like, why did I sign up for this again? Why am I doing this? Why do I think I love this? And I just push through. I just keep pushing through. I will go back and check back in a lot with whatever I wrote down as kind of my structure. What are some of the plot points I put down? Because I have to remind myself of what I'm getting to next. If I let the characters drive the bus completely, we may never get there. You know what I mean? Like, we just may never arrive at the conclusion. But I also can't, if I get too resistant, then I end up losing all of the best stuff. A lot of the best stuff comes in that zany, I don't know what's happening kind of bit, really imaginative, weird, quirky stuff starts coming up. And I find that a lot of that's what readers respond to the most, I think, So there's kind of a dance that happens between, and the way I see it now is I really think what's happening is there are two different parts of my brain that are trying to navigate the process at the same time. There's the really creative flow part, and then there's the much more analytical, structured part, and they are not friends. They don't get along well. And so it's kind of a tug of war for quite a while until I realize I'm rounding the bend towards the finale or the conclusion. And I usually have a pretty strong sense of what that is from the very beginning. And then that's kind of the sprint. That's the last bit of the marathon. You're going to really pound it out. You're going to find that second wind and push through. It's also sometimes kind of the worst part because you're the most eager to be done. but then you kind of get through to that very end. And then I take a breath for however long I can. Sometimes that's like a week. Maybe if I'm really lucky, I get like 2 weeks to not look at it. Really, I wish you could do this with just, it wouldn't be fair. Readers never wait this long. But like if you could really take a couple of months away, because the clearer you are when you come back to it, I think the better you are as a reviser. But I take whatever break I can get. And sometimes it's just like 3 days, depending on where I am in my deadline schedule. And then I go back through and I read the whole thing over again. I make small changes along the way, and I take a lot of notes about what I think needs to be changed or made better or altered. It's usually a lot of stuff that got dropped, forgotten. It just didn't get carried through the story the whole way like it needed to. And I need to go back and feed and thread those kind of details in. And then sometimes there are real structural changes that happen. When I wrote the first draft of the Bane Witch and I went back through and reread it, I realized that Piers and Regis don't have their first real contact until much too far into the novel. Readers really needed to know who Regis was and the role he was going to play in her life a lot sooner. And there needed to be a sense of romance happening much quicker. And so I had to revise what I had for them to have that.
You added that.
I added that. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. And some of that was difficult because at the same time, one of my pet peeves in any kind of book or show is when they show somebody being traumatized or they talk about someone being traumatized, a character, and then they show them doing something that to me makes no sense. And again, people do respond to trauma in a lot of different ways. So I don't really mean this in too judgy of a way, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense to me for like how trauma really feels and what people are really capable of. So to me, the idea of Piers jumping into a new relationship was not super realistic. And I really didn't want to show this woman who's been assaulted in all of these horrible ways, just like, she just waltzes into, being vulnerable with this new man that she barely knows. So I had to set a lot of things up to try to make that a little more plausible. But for the sake of the story, it has to happen. And it has to happen at a certain
point.
That
to me, it wouldn't have been believable had he not said, "I'll sleep outside."
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I was like, oh, and hand the gun. Like, I mean, obviously you did that intentionally, but it was like, because I too, if you did not add those two things, would have been like,
no way.
Really? Like, unless you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And so, but it was actually, like I said, it was nice because it was such a stark comparison to the men that we've already been introduced to.
Right.
And we've all met those men.
Right.
So,
well, and what we know
immediately
is that what women need, I think, more than anything, to feel vulnerable and to be intimate is to feel safe. I mean, I really think that's the number one thing women need, is to feel safe. And so him creating a situation, like you said, by those couple of scenarios where she could really feel safe with him, then set us up for it to be a little more believable. So I might have to go back, in a revision and make some changes like that. Some things maybe need to happen sooner, and things kind of, a lot of times it's just tying up a lot of threads that, like I said, kind of get dropped along the way. It's sometimes so many things to hold. And I've noticed as I age, as I get older, it gets more and more challenging for me to hold all of those things at once. And so I think I have to go back, if you're kind of using like a weaving analogy, and I'm not a weaver of any kind, but I have to go back and find loose threads that I dropped and then reweave them into all the way through so that it makes sense. And then if I get a chance to do that all over again, take another beat, if I have the time, and read it and do it again, I really feel best if I get to do that twice before I hand something to an editor.
That makes sense.
But I don't always get that. It just kind of depends. And there will be chances once the editor has read and stuff through the whole editorial process to do more. But
do you ever have the editors like ask you to change things in a way that you're not happy about?
Yeah, I've had that happen in the past. It hasn't happened recently, really. They did ask me to change something on my novel that's coming out in winter of 2026, Only Spell Deep. When I first pitched that, they asked me to change the character's backstory. And I was initially put off by that for a second. The knee-jerk reaction always comes first, and I don't say anything. I just sit with that, and then I wait to see, because I do have a brain that loves to bubble up new ideas. So usually if I'll just sit with it, something else will come along, and then I'll get very excited and want to write whatever that idea is. And that's what happened there. So then I got very excited about the new backstory I wrote, and was then happy to carry on with the novel like that. But I have in the past written, entire novels that I had a novel that was picked up by a publisher, Jellyfish Press. They're a small indie publisher that they, wanted me to change the antagonist. So I had to rewrite a whole new antagonist character and write out the antagonist I had written. And I wasn't crazy about it, but it's also, one of those things I have often in this line of work felt like beggars can't be choosers. You're just usually pretty hungry for any opportunity that comes your way. And so give me a minute and I'll figure it out, if it means I can move forward and get something published and put out there for readers,
It's like the, just reality check, it's not, obviously neither of us are writers currently.
Well, I think it's just about the sacrifice. Like, are we going to give up the whole for a no, or do we compromise so we're still,
right,
getting our essence is still getting out there, maybe just not in the capacity we wanted. Yeah. Or you remember that little nugget, and guess what's going in the next book?
Yeah,
you don't even realize. And
that's right. You can always
create a character that once. Yeah. I mean, it's just people, right? It's just, you could, create different characters and not use it in that one, and then it makes sense in another.
That's right.
So I know we're coming up to an hour. I don't want to keep you over. So who has influenced you the most on your literary adventures?
I tend to be the kind of reader who has favorite books versus favorite authors. I'm not really someone who's like, this is my favorite author and I read everything they write. I do have authors I've read more than one thing from, or I read a lot of what they write. And I guess I would say now those are kind of favorite authors. But more than that, it's certain books that really stay with me. And so, over the years, I think from my really early age, obviously Poe, my mom bought me a book of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories when I was in elementary school. I'm sure she had no idea what she was doing. I remember the Black Cat was the first story I read. It was so it's really stayed with me. It scarred me in a beautiful way that I love and want more of.
Now so we know why you lean towards the dark.
Huh?
Sorry. I said, now we know why you said you lean towards the darker aspect.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, really, all of those, it was planting seeds all along the way, for sure. And I always loved reading stuff like that. I read above my grade level, and I tended to read, I make the joke that my parents never took a book out of my hand, and I credit them with that. But also, if they had known I was reading half the time, they probably would have taken books away. They just weren't reading as prolifically as I was, so they had no idea. But I was, reading all kinds of things. Wuthering Heights has been huge for me. It's one of my, top books of all time. Heathcliff is my absolute favorite book boyfriend, but also he's a sociopath, and that's very disturbing. And
he's a psycho.
Bronte,
he's terrible,
to me
but I love him.
Yeah. So certain books like that. I love Vanity Fair. I read The Handmaid's Tale in high school. I remember that very distinctly as being the first time I really began to understand what voice was and falling in love with an author's voice. And Margaret Atwood's voice in that novel is breathtaking. I just still, to this day, can't get over it. And these are books that I'll read again. I hardly ever reread books, but there are a few that I'll read again. Mists of Avalon.
You would read again.
Yeah. Mists of Avalon was huge for me. And I think it was a lot of just the seeing a kind of a tale being told from the women's perspective versus the way we'd always been told that story, I think was just a really big deal. And as somebody who gravitates towards, I write about witches, but I also practice witchcraft in real life. That is my spiritual path. And so being interested in pagan religions and pagan faiths and pagan practices and all these different things. So that book and that whole series was really influential for me. Even though it's come out that author is really problematic now. And so I always feel a little weird mentioning that one. But, just to be truthful, these days I love Rachel Harrison. I don't know if you've read any of her books. They're really fun,
I haven't.
kind of horror. It's like, if I could give it a title, I would call it like girlfriend horror, but that seems like, I feel like that kind of minimizes how good they are. But they're horror, but like, I don't know, they're just a juicy good time. And so I love her books. Eve Chase, I think she's in the UK, but she writes a lot of Gothic novels. I love her work, and her voice is so beautiful and compelling. I don't know, there's so many. I fall in love with books all the time. I'm sure you guys know this experience. You're like, this is my new favorite. It's like the books you can't stop thinking of. I just read this book, Blood on Her Tongue. I don't know if y'all have read that one. Gothic, horror, cannot stop thinking about it. The whole time I was reading it, I love to, nobody else in my family reads quite like this either. So I love to kind of terrorize my family with the weird, dark stuff I'm reading. And so I would be like, there's a lot of like eyeball gelatin and, and things like that. And they would just be like, gross, like, we didn't want to know about this. I just read Our Wives Under the Sea. Right, exactly. Which has been out a few years, and that was absolutely chilling, so beautifully written. So, I'm always drawn in by things that are very dark, that have some kind of fantastical element to them, and that also where I find the voice is really important to me. I have to love the way the writer is talking about this book and this story. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I end up for sure. But I have so many influences. I have some listed on my website, but there's too many.
I was trying to like write down notes while you're like, all right, I got to read that. That was a big reaction. I got to read that. Yeah. So, well, first and foremost, I want to thank you. You also, I know we touched on this when we weren't recording, but we're one of the first people to be kind and responsive and give us any feedback when we first started, and we almost had nothing to offer. And your encouragement were words that we clung to. And when we were prepping for this, I was like, sorry, my pet. I'm like, this is who said that to us. Like, it's that person. I'm like, yeah, it's the person that said, it's like my friends, whatever you said. So I just want to thank you for being so encouraging and kind, especially on the big wide world of the internet. It's
absolutely.
It's special.
I know what it feels like to be in the trenches. So
yeah, it meant a lot, and it was very encouraging. And so in closing, we wanted to ask, why don't you ask the last thing? What do you hope that your readers take away from your work?
I mean, I think it's a couple of things. One of the things I hope the most is that my readers feel seen or validated in my work somewhere, especially since, like I said, I write for women, I write about women. And I think beyond that, I hope that they just take away something that makes them feel powerful, that makes the world feel a little more mysterious and exciting, and that they just have a really good time. When I first started writing, you always think, oh, you want to say something so important, and I do, but at the same time, I want my books just to be fun for readers, a wonderful escape for them, at the same time that maybe I'm trying to say a thing or two.
Well, you did that with this one, at least. We'll have to read more of your work, but on this one, I think you managed to do both. So
great.
Well, thank you so much. We will be in touch. Again, we're going to be doing our regular review episode on this as well. So for our listeners, we will go more into depth on the storyline and what we liked and our favorite quotes and all the things that we thought and all the things we felt. So thank you so much, Ava. It's been a pleasure.
This was wonderful. Thanks for having me, you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.